Thank you, Neera. And can we just pause for a moment and imagine a Washington that was run by Neera Tanden, like a Washington that would actually work? Why don't you give her and all of the Center for American Progress a round of applause for what's been an extraordinary day. I'm very conscious that I'm the last speaker of the day and all that's standing between you and happy hour. But I want to thank Cap for what has been an amazing day of hope and ideas, of what I feel is forward momentum in this nation that so badly needs it. And it's been wonderful to be with so many inspiring leaders as we look at 2020 and a new path forward for the American people that has been charted out here. I think we heard here from the very beginning from Stacey Abrams and throughout the day that victory starts with defeating Donald Trump. But while that is necessary, it is not sufficient. And what the American people need as we look forward is much, much more than that. You see, the American people, my friends, want the good life. Not the kind of good life we see in a commercial, a beer commercial, but something deep and profound. They want a chance to fulfill the instinct that lives inside each one of us. And what I'd put before you today as we close out this time, the pursuit of happiness. You know, if Thomas Hobbes described life as nasty, brutish, and short, if the Greeks said, "Call no man happy until he is dead," our American philosophy, our American experiment, called for something radically different. Our founding documents, we defined ourselves through three inalienable rights that we know so well: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We often get caught up in those first two. We define ourselves by those first two and our battles over life itself and liberty. But our founders agreed that Americans must be afforded the right to happiness, and life and liberty exist as the precursors to the most important of those three, to live a happy and fulfilling life. When Jefferson wrote those immortal words, he was writing specifically that happiness, though, relies on good government. Government that's rooted in our care for each other, in our shared commitment to a future where our children can thrive. And yet, despite that foundation, despite our vast wealth and power, America is ranked 18th in the world in terms of happiness. Why? Well, you've heard about it today. A healthcare crisis, a barbell economy, soaring student debt, unattainable housing, and more than anything, I believe that our unhappiness comes from the disconnection that Americans are feeling right now, that we don't have a sense of belonging. Americans are asking, where do we belong anymore in our country? And where does America belong in the world? Unfortunately, our leaders in Washington, especially at the White House, have very few answers. This president who divides us and remains the subject of a counterintelligence investigation, an attorney general in contempt of Congress, state by state, men are deciding that they should legislate what women do with their bodies, and the great American promise that if you work hard, if you play by the rules, that you'll do better by your parents or better than your parents, that is broken. In just 3 years, our moral and our political authority in the world has been diminished by our withdrawal from the Paris Accords, the Iran nuclear deal, our waffling on Article 5 of NATO, and on the incarceration of children at our border. Simply put, Americans don't feel like they belong, and they don't trust our institutions. You know, Gallup does a poll every year asking Americans a simple question about whether they trust 15 different institutions. Only 3 of those are above 50%: police, the military, and small businesses. Americans have lost faith in the news that they read, in places that they put their savings, and especially in the people that they elect, and that goes for both parties. Trust and faith. Think about those lessons we hear from the pulpits in our temples and our churches. Think of the teachings that are enshrined in just about every holy book. Yes, we are taught to reject evil, of course, but true faith comes from something more than rejecting evil. It comes from a positive faith, a belief in knowing where your God wants to take you and trusting in that power. So you see, our vision must be as strong as that, not just a rejection of Donald Trump, not just restoring the status quo of 3 years ago. Now, I don't know what'll make everybody happy. I read recently that there's 1.5 million Americans who would be happier if the 8th season of Game of Thrones were redone. But there are a few basics that I know we do agree on. One, that work must have meaning. 2, that your children deserve a good public education. And three, that the future should feel full of beginnings and not of endings. We should be full of beginnings and not endings. So our party and this room and our allies as progressives, we have to carve a path to happiness for the American people. Remind Americans that they do belong. You see, from belonging comes trust, from trust comes commitment, and from commitment comes progress. I'm here today because as broken as our federal system feels, as a mayor of the second biggest city in America, and traveling the country with my fellow mayors, I see a great America in America's cities and towns. And today I want to share with you what America's cities can maybe teach our nation's capital to contribute to that vision of belonging and progress for our party and our country. It was said in the past that states are the laboratories of democracy. I would offer now it is America's cities. We are centers for progress, and how we as Democrats can restore confidence and happiness as an achievable pursuit by looking at what's happening in our urban areas. Now, let us not also forget that America from its very founding has always been about how power has come from our communities to our nation's capital and not vice versa. In Los Angeles, we're not waiting on Washington to deliver on infrastructure. The same day Donald Trump was elected, we joined with other cities around the country to approve $230 billion of infrastructure. In Los Angeles, it was $120 billion to put 15 transit lines in the most trafficked city in America and put 787,000 Americans to work. And now through a nonprofit called Accelerator for America, which I've helped found, we're working with cities all across this nation to generate their own local infrastructure funding, creating national change from the bottom up. While Washington demonizes immigrants, denies climate change, and wages a trade war, what's happening locally? Well, in Los Angeles, our libraries, every single one of them, has a citizenship center to integrate the next generation of Americans. We're creating jobs while we're reducing our carbon emissions. We're breaking records for our international trade and travel at our ports and airports. And over the last 5 years, we have passed a wide-reaching agenda for progress through key investments in our city. In a state, and I think some of you know this in California, where you have to pass any revenue measure by a 2/3 vote, listen to this. Not only did voters approve infrastructure measures, we passed measures to build affordable housing, end homelessness, clean our water, create open spaces and parks, and to support our community colleges. At the same time, we raised our minimum wage, cut our city's business tax, made community college free, and we're outpacing the nation on job growth and wealth creation. We created 35,000 green jobs, making up for all the coal jobs left in America in a town with just over 1% of the nation's population. And we also convinced the world in the face of the Muslim ban and family separations that they should believe in America, and were awarded the 2028 Olympic Games. That's a damn good American story. And it's a progressive story that lays the groundwork for a stronger tomorrow. It's the story of a nation where everybody belongs. I know a lot of people talk about inclusion and diversity. I like the word belonging better, because diversity can mean many things. Hometown Buffet has a diverse buffet. And inclusion implies I'm more powerful than you in including you. But belonging gets to our hearts. It gets to our aspirations. It gets to who we are as Americans. And this story I'm sharing from LA doesn't amplify the divisive politics spewing from the White House or Twitter or cable news. It's just the story of people pulling together and getting stuff done. I think CAP understands that mandate better than anyone else. Born in the wilderness of the Bush administration, this center showed us not only how to push back on bad policy, but how to push forward when we would regain power with smart ideas. So when we took Congress back in 2006, when Barack Obama won the White House, we had a substantive agenda, on day one. That's the kind of foresight that we need today. Our farmers need much more than an end to the trade war. They need a path forward in a confusing global economy and a changing climate. Yes, we must, of course, end the incarceration of children, like my grandfather who was crossed over the border in his mother's, my great-grandmother's arms. But more than ending family separation, we need pathways for citizenship. We need to defend immigrants. We need to craft a foreign policy that's centered on aid and investment and diplomacy to stabilize our hemisphere. And while we must restore our frayed social safety net and help people earn higher wages and access basic services, it's not enough to help people tread water. It isn't enough to help people stay afloat. We need an agenda to lift America back up. We must create opportunities for people to pursue happiness. So as we dive into the throes of the presidential election, let's remember our cause is not just to defeat Donald Trump. Our cause is to pursue happiness for the American people, to set a vision and a plan, and to seize it for America. So I'd like to touch on 3 lessons to show how we get there. First, we need to build in America by taking a generational approach to infrastructure. Second, we need to protect our homes and our communities and our families by winning the war on climate change. And third, we have to help all of our children advance through inclusive investment. It's time for new beginnings, not just keeping people's head above water, but helping them see a future for themselves and their children and this country. So first, infrastructure. I didn't time today to be this way, but in case you didn't know while you were here, our president walked away from the table. He walked away from this country's crumbling communities, and he walked away from the American people. After ambitions of billions and then trillions of dollars to help Americans win the future, Donald Trump showed that he still can't get construction projects done. But remember, the same night that we elected him, as I mentioned, voters from Ohio to Washington approved $250 billion in infrastructure investments. Almost half of that was in my town, as I mentioned. The $120 billion of Measure M, the largest local infrastructure initiative in American history ×2, one that never sunsets, and one that is creating 787,000 middle-class jobs that can't be exported, that are recession-proof. These are jobs that can help pay for a home, send kids to college. And that success inspired us to found Accelerator for America, which launched exactly 1 year after the 2016 election. We didn't know it would be a big deal at the time, but with some fellow mayors, one of whom was from South Bend, Indiana, we held our first meeting in the Studebaker factory there in that town, in the same spot where my friend Pete Buttigieg would then launch his campaign for president. Accelerator put together a bipartisan poll, and after healthcare, it was the second biggest issue for Americans that they want both parties to work together on. Nearly 80% of Americans say infrastructure is important. And we can't talk about infrastructure as dollars and miles and programs. It's about people. It's about whether you get to see your child on time because the commute is lessened. It's about your dating pool because where you can live and how far you can go out on a date. It's about the human experience that infrastructure enables. Even though the president walked away from his duty to the country today, we need to do more than deliver funding for a short-term fix. And as we see other countries, other nations around the world map out infrastructure plans for a century, they watch our country limp through 2- and 5-year Band-Aids. So today I am calling on us to create a national infrastructure strategy, a plan for the next 50 years, and yes, you heard that right, 50 years of American prosperity, to build the transportation and communications and energy and water projects to move America forward and to position us to win the future. And when we do so, it will be the largest expansion of the middle class in our lifetimes. It will tell Americans who are repairing our bridges, who are laying down cables, who are building our turbines, that they belong and that they can see themselves and their children in the America of tomorrow. Second, climate change. While Americans are worried about whether their jobs will survive the future economy, climate change has Americans worried about whether their children will be able to survive at all. I was talking recently to a teenager, and I was sharing with her that when I was her age, we used to think the world would come to an end because of nuclear war. She said, we have the same feeling today as teenagers because of climate change. It's visceral. It's real. For mayors, we feel it in fires on the sidelines of our cities, in floods through the streets of our towns. And we cannot build the country that our children deserve unless we protect the planet that they will inherit. It's been very exciting for me to hear Washington talk about a Green New Deal. But I've said, don't just look across the aisle or across Congress to find it. Look across the country, because this generational battle against climate change is a moral imperative. It's an environmental emergency and a massive economic opportunity. Cities across the country are rising to meet this moment. And if enough of us take a stand, we can create national change despite this president, because most of America will already be moving on to a low-carbon, green energy future. In LA, we kicked off our Green New Deal 5 years ago. We created a model that I hope the nation will follow. I just testified the Select Committee today on Capitol Hill about this. In 2015, we said work on the environment needed to go hand in hand with work on our economy and equity. and people said we were a little crazy. But last month, we took that plan even further, pledging that Los Angeles will be a carbon-neutral city by 2050, a place where every building will be emissions-free, a place where 100% of our vehicles will be zero emissions, a place where we won't send a single piece of trash to a landfill, where we will recycle 100% of our water and power all of our homes and businesses with 100% clean energy. And just because we're leaving pollution behind doesn't mean that we'll leave workers behind. My Green New Deal will put 300,000 people to work in new jobs, building on those 35,000 jobs I mentioned, in water, solar panels, retrofitting buildings with cool roofs. And we're making sure that these good middle-class jobs will go to Angelenos from low-income communities and communities of color that have often borne the brunt of climate change. And working with our sisters and brothers in the building trades will create those jobs of the future to ensure they're not just any jobs, but fulfilling careers. The Carpenters Union, for example, that we're working very closely with, spends about $250 million a year on training, without any public subsidy, by the way. And as we talk about green jobs, about the future of work, we have the opportunity to create this smart transition for workers, maybe even a guarantee of workers in old polluting energy jobs of yesterday to have those jobs guaranteed for them tomorrow. That's critical, because the pursuit of happiness requires the dignity of work. And Americans should be able to earn a living wage on a livable planet. Finally, inclusive investment. Whether I'm in Birmingham or Boston, everyone is wondering the same thing. Is there a place for me in the future economy? Will my children will they be met with opportunities, or will they be met with obstacles? And for too many, our nation's middle class just seems out of reach. We keep averaging our prosperity. We hear how well this country is doing because our peaks are higher than ever. But our valleys sometimes feel even lower, and you can't average out one's prosperity. A secure retirement has become a hope and a prayer. People are working fewer shifts, getting less overtime. Automation is no longer a distant threat. It is here on the factory floor now. I say this is an exciting time to live and an anxious time to live. I've combined those words into a new word called anxitement. You know that feeling like right before you give a speech, or, wow, it's amazing, I can tuck my daughter into bed with FaceTime, but will that technology put us out of a job? New cures to diseases we never thought were curable, but at the same time, I can't make my health care payment. That anxiety is making us question where we and our children and grandchildren belong in the 21st century. But we know that that path to success begins long before you submit a resume for your first job. It is a pre-K to 14 with our community colleges undertaking at every age. Now, I'm not here to point out what has already been made clear by my friends who are running for president, that massive student debt, a college education that costs twice as much adjusted for inflation as when I went to college today. And the pursuit of happiness stops in its tracks when a recent graduate finds their dreams shackled to 25 years of monthly payments. But also after almost 65 years to the day after Brown versus Board of Education, we can't say that separate but equal is relegated to the ashes of history, if we are honest about our nation's education system. The reality is that 8 out of every 10 students in my hometown's public schools live in poverty. Our public schools have become where we warehouse our trauma and our poverty. In New York, only 7 Black and Latino students were admitted to Stuyvesant this year in a class of 900. 91% of the students at LA Unified School District, and you can go to Boston to find similar statistics, are Latino or African American. It's time to stop pretending that our current school system is the great equalizer. So let's stop paying lip service to the ideas that schools should be gateways to opportunity and actually do something about it. Because really what we are doing, what all of our work is for, what is all of our work for, if young people can't even imagine a happy life, let alone pursue it. So let me tell you what's working in LA. We are training 2,500 new early childhood educators by 2025. Seeing cities like New York and others, like in California, who are expanding pre-K, that should be something universal across this country. We made history at the upper end of that pre-K through 14 by making community college free, the largest city in America. And listen to this, after just 1.5 years, we boosted by 56% the number of kids going from our public school system into full-time community college. And we're fighting now to pass a measure called Measure EE in LA, which will help us lower class sizes, make sure that there's libraries that are reopened, a nurse there for more than 1 day a week in our schools because kids don't plan when they're going to be injured or sick. When voters trust that government is invested in raising communities up and helping young people succeed, that's what is possible when government gets back into the business of boosting happiness. Just imagine how things might look if representatives in D.C. from one party spent less time on cable news and more time on people's commutes, on housing, on schools, on environment, on the things the senator was talking about. My conversations are always about jobs, healthcare, housing, and education. Folks might start to believe that Washington cares about them again, and in turn might start to trust government again. And they might start seeing a future for themselves, not just in their communities or in their cities, but in the American story. That is why we are here today. I've learned so much in nearly 2 decades at the local level. I knock on doors on the weekends with strangers, not when I'm campaigning, in between elections. And the look of surprise on the face of an American who never thinks government will ever show up and say, "How are we doing and what can we do for you?" is everything this revolution demands. I've always heard in the Trump era and long before it that people are looking for something more than survival. They're looking for meaning. No matter where they live or how they vote, Americans will always do what it takes to better their communities. But when they are listened to, not just tolerated, when they feel that government is investing in them, in their happiness, not just exercising or overreaching their power, when they're given the opportunity to live with dignity and to find a sense of self-worth, the promise of America is within reach. Our guiding philosophy in Los Angeles and in cities nationwide should come from Aristotle's words that are etched in my city hall on the top floor, named after our greatest mayor, Tom Bradley. It's from Aristotle's Politics, and it says that the city came into being to preserve life, but it exists for the good life. In other words, we formed government to be safe, but that's not the end goal. It's not life and liberty. It is the pursuit of happiness, to fall in love, to go to a concert that moves us, to have those connections with different cultures, to have ideas and thoughts that we never thought possible, and to make a life full of meaning. Let me close with a quote by Robert Browning in a poem that I recently read about the artist Andrea del Sarto. One of the lines Robert Browning says that a man's reach must always exceed his grasp. Our reach should always exceed our grasp. In other words, think about the book of American history, the slave that reached out for her freedom, even though she died in shackles. The woman who said all people should be able to vote, including women, even though she never was able to fill out a ballot. The GI who fought for freedom but came back in a body bag. The farm worker who thought that her children shouldn't die from pesticides. Or folks who decided to reach out so they could marry their loved one but died before that Supreme Court decision came down. You see, we as Americans always reach beyond our grasp so that even if we can't hold it, our children or our children's children will. Because that's what the pursuit of happiness is about. And I want to close this conference out by letting you know that ideas are alive and well across America. But more than ideas, so is action. So spend 5 minutes watching cable TV or responding to Twitter, but then let's get to work. Let's see America being born in every good idea in a small town and a big city across America. Feel that hope in the investments that we are making. And let's do more than throw out the inhabitant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Let us help America be reborn with the progress that we here feel and the happiness that when we close our eyes, we imagine. And if we do that, our work will be done and our reach will have exceeded our grasp. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.